things I want to cover. One is the Skills Commission. As I hope many of you are aware, the final Skills Commission meeting was held last week. Councillor Hinchcliffe, do you want to just give us an update on where we're at with that and where the next steps are?
Adam, DWP.
Join the meeting.
Councillor Hinchcliffe, you're still on mute if you're talking. Should come back to that. I think Councillor Hinchcliffe want to give a quick update on where we're at with the programme there. The LEP board also met on the 3rd of September, and both the strategic economic framework and the economic recovery plans were endorsed by the board, so we're moving ahead with those. So I think that's good news, and gives us a foundation to move forward with some of our programmes here. I don't know, Jenna, if you can contact Councillor Hinchcliffe in the background, see if we can, or Catherine, if you can contact Councillor Hinchcliffe, see if she wants to come in to talk through the Skills Commission. Whilst waiting for that, should we just move on to the Employment and Skills Programme? Brian, you're going to give us an update on the progress here so far.
Thank you, Chairman. Just turn myself off mute. Yeah, just obviously to give you an update. One of the challenges we're facing at the moment is that more and more people are coming off furlough. We've got around 340,000 people on furlough in the Leeds City region. Government's contribution towards furlough costs drops by 10% and ends in October. So we are seeing an increase in volumes coming through of inquiries through to the Employment Hub. 2,815 to 24-year-olds have been engaged to date, and 1,800 businesses supported. But we are seeing those individuals that are furthest from the labour market not engaging as much as we'd like to, and I think we need to be more proactive in reaching some of those disadvantaged communities. The other thing that obviously we're keen to promote is apprenticeships, and obviously apprenticeships have suffered through COVID, so we are looking to relaunch the apprenticeship levy transfer scheme to promote that to businesses. We're hoping to get at least another 10 firms to pledge levy funds to be transferred to smaller businesses, which would amount to around £3 million. We will be relaunching that. 100% of the apprenticeship fees would be paid by the larger companies. And that, together with the £2,000 incentive that the government are offering, should hopefully increase the number of apprenticeship starts. Schools partnerships, obviously planned activity should start to increase as the schools have returned. And with regard to careers, we've seen huge interest in Future Goals and the Future Goals website, over 2 million hits over the last couple of months. Obviously in response to a much more targeted marketing campaign. We're also seeing obviously workers that are at risk of redundancy or furlough registering their interest via the site for additional careers support through the Employment Hub. One of the other programs that members will be aware of is the Reboot program, which has been promoted to graduates, furloughed staff and newly unemployed people. And through the National Skills Fund, we will be submitting a bid for up to 4 million to support the upskilling of adults across the region. That's essentially it. Obviously, Skills for Growth, we're looking at strengthening business and education partnerships as we move forward. But the big concern at the moment is the number of people that will be coming off furlough. Although the economy bounced back 6.6%, with the figures released on Friday, the number of people actually on furlough, whilst it's declining, is resulting in an increase in unemployment. And I think last week's stats showed a 3% uptick in people entering the labour market. It is likely we'll see more people considering self-employment as an option and an increase in new firm formation rates as more and more people get laid off. So one of the programs we're looking at is developing entrepreneurship skills and business startup skills to try and mitigate the impact of the potential redundancies. Happy to take questions, Chairman.
Any questions for Brian? And I think the apprenticeship levy transfer scheme is a fantastic way of helping out here, and I know there's a lot of large corporations that are willing to do that. So I would encourage all the members and anybody listening to help us do that, because it really helps young people into employment and opens doors that wouldn't be able to open otherwise.
Would it be helpful for me to, if Councillor Hinchcliffe isn't available, would it be helpful for me to just run through the
She's back.
Lines for the Skills Commission? Okay, fine.
In fact, we're going to move to, if there's no other questions, we'll move to Councillor Hinchcliffe to talk through the Skills Commission now.
Hello, thank you very much for that. So yes, Skills Commission, we had our final meeting really last week as Skills Commissioners to look at the report. We have a blueprint and we have 9 recommendations about what we think should happen to make sure the skills system is more fit for purpose. A lot of it is around increasing accessibility to people who need skills to get a job, but also around careers advice and about in-work education, about how you involve employers in skills journey. So Nav is one of the commissioners, and thanks to him and everybody else who's been on that. I'm not sure I've got any others on here, Rashik obviously. And the report comes out on the 24th of September. So there's an event on 24th September. If you want to attend that, you may do drop an email to Sonia Midgley or myself and make sure you're on that. But obviously we'll be, it's a really important time, of course, for skills, because as we all look forward, hopefully, to economic recovery at some point, skills are going to be a crucial part of that. So what we did discuss as well was making sure that Rashik and I do some specific work on what we think the government's response should be on skills in a time of COVID recovery. Hopefully it is going to be recovery, but I think there's some clear messages that we want to send both as commissioners and perhaps as this skills panel to make sure that government is listening to policy interventions that we think need to take place to help economic recovery. Thank you. Just a brief update.
Yeah, that's helpful. And for me, and I think for all the panel members here, skills is part of the answer. So we will only recover from the situation we're in now with the right skills. And those skills need to be very tailored to the individuals in the region and the needs of the region as well. So that the work of this panel is more important now than it ever has been. So thank you for that. And it takes us nicely on to the economic recovery and future employment skills policy. Peter, are you on? Can you take us through that? Peter, I think you're still on mute.
Can I check that people can people hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. I believe there are some slides that Sophie is going to share on screen.
I'm sorry,
Hopefully.
but the message says that the host has disabled screen sharing, so I'm not able to do that.
I can do that. 1 second.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, I can't do that. Who's the host? Is that Jeanette? I think she's just doing it, Sophie.
Right, if you want to try now, I've given everyone permission to share the screen, so you should be able to do it.
Thanks. Yes, there we go.
Thank you, Jeanette.
Okay, thank you. In addition to these slides, there's also a paper in your pack about our plans for the annual labour market analysis for this year. So, but the purpose of this presentation is really to provide an understanding of what's happening to the labour market and what the emerging challenges are. Now, it's an interim analysis because obviously we're in the midst of a very volatile situation for the economy. The overall purpose of the annual labour market analysis is to assess current and future skill needs, and skill needs to a large extent driven by the profile of employment in the economy, both the sectoral and the occupational profile. it's hard to say with any certainty what this profile is going to look like, even in a few months' time. So that's a big issue. And added to that, most of our sources of local data have a time lag. So the latest data often pertains to the pre-crisis period or the early stages of the crisis. So an example of that is government recently published a comprehensive set of labour market projections, and they landed just before the crisis. So they're not much use to us now in the current circumstances. So for those reasons, in the paper, in the covering paper, I propose to push back the publication of the labour market analysis so that we have more information available. To be honest, the picture will still be unclear at the end of November, which is the proposed date for publication, even with that extra time. But I think we need to balance the need for better information with a recognition that there's a demand for intelligence, an urgent demand for intelligence to inform action. Next slide, please. Sophie, next slide, please.
Sorry, I think there's a bit of a delay. I've moved on.
Okay. So the next slide looks at the national context, and I think that's important because obviously the national situation shapes what's happening locally, but also there's a better range of information available nationally, which can give us an insight into how the situation is developing. First of all, looking at employment, data from HMRC indicates that the number of paid employees has fallen by about 750,000 between March and July of this year, so i.e. since the start of the crisis. Now, that doesn't really give us a full picture of the impact of the crisis because many people are in a job but not actually working, they're on furlough. And Brian referred to the situation around furlough. About a third of employees have been on furlough at some stage during the crisis, but the latest ONS survey data suggests that that proportion has reduced. So the majority of workers are either back at their normal place of work or they're working remotely now. I'll go into more detail about that. But nonetheless, the number of people on furlough is considerable, and there's potential to swell the numbers of people who are unemployed considerably as the job retention scheme unwinds. And further to that, an analysis published today, a national analysis of potential redundancies notified in advance by employers to the Insolvency Service, suggests that there are around 450,000 redundancies in the pipeline during this current quarter, July to September of 2020, with a further 200,000 expected in quarter four. And to give some context to the scale of those redundancies, at the peak in the last recession was 300,000. But we're talking about nearly 500,000 for this quarter, if those forecasts prove to be correct. So it looks like there are large numbers of redundancies in the pipeline. If we look at working hours, that gives us a more reliable picture of what's happening in the economy in terms of employment and activity, probably than the employment figures. So the actual average hours worked are down by nearly a fifth in the April to June quarter compared with the previous quarter. And in particular, part-time work has been hit massively. So that's down by more than a third. And I think that reflects the sectors that are most affected by lockdown restrictions, which we'll come on to in a moment. We've also seen a negative impact on self-employment in the national figures. So a significant number of people leaving self-employment. Now that's mostly to enter jobs, employee jobs, rather than become unemployed or inactive. So it's not purely bad news. But I think since we're placing quite a strong emphasis on self-employment and enterprise within the economic recovery plan, it's probably important to understand that better and to track the trends around self-employment as time goes on. We've also obviously got figures around unemployment, claimant unemployment. So the number of claimant unemployed, according to the latest figures for July, stands about at 1.45 million. So it's more than doubled between March and July. And that rise has been driven by a combination of temporary layoffs among those who are not eligible for other financial support, exits from work, i.e. redundancies, and also labour market entrants taking longer to find work, particularly young people. Now, within the claimant figures, we also have a small number of people who have who are still employed but have a very low income, and that's probably around 100,000, and that reflects changes in the sort of benefit eligibility criteria. But we'll get more. We'll get the next set of monthly claimant unemployment figures tomorrow. Not surprisingly, the crisis had a big impact on employers' propensity to hire people. So the number of vacancies between March and April of 2020 halved just over that month, over that 1 month, based on the ONS's vacancy survey. But as we've emerged from restrictions linked to COVID, recruitment activities started to recover. So vacancies, according to the national statistics, grew by 30% between April and July. And hospitality was one of the strongest growing sectors after seeing large falls in the number of vacancies. But we'll look at the local position regarding vacancies later in the presentation. And the final point around national context, it's a positive aspect, and it's important to recognise that even in the depths of the crisis, lots of people were still getting jobs, and the labour market is still functioning. So between April and June of this year, which sort of coincides with the full lockdown period, around 500,000 people per month were still entering new jobs, either moving jobs or starting work for the first time. So the labour market is still functioning. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this next slide, again, it's based on national data, but it's really we need to use national data because we don't have local data. But it's in order to understand the state of flux that the labour market is in and the workforce is in terms of returning to work. So I think it's worth drilling down into that using this national data. So what the chart does is plot sectors of the economy according to the proportion of staff who have returned to the normal place of work versus the proportion who are still on furlough. And it uses data from the National ONS survey. But what we've done is we've tailored it so the size of the bubbles reflect the scale of employment in the relevant sector in West Yorkshire. And I should credit my colleague James Hopton who created this chart. If we look at furlough and apply the national figures to the local position, we estimate we've got around 170,000 workers who are currently on furlough in Leeds City region, and that's probably around 130,000 in West Yorkshire. I'm looking at the chart, we've got three segments of industries effectively. In the top left, we've got sectors that have largely returned to the workplace or were in the workplace throughout. So we're including within that sectors like health and care, manufacturing and construction. In the bottom left of the chart, we've got a second segment of sectors that are working remotely. So we're including within that information and communications, professional services. So classic white collar, high skilled sectors. But towards the right of the chart, we have sectors that are still on furlough to a large extent. And most notably arts and entertainment, we've got nearly 50% still on furlough, hospitality, and also business admin sector. And just to unpack that sector, that includes things like rental activities, employment agencies, travel agencies, and building services. And that is actually quite a large sector of the economy, as you'll see from the size of the bubble. So maybe it's the third, perhaps it's the third of these segments, the ones that are still in furlough, that are still on furlough, that are most likely to be negatively affected in terms of the employment prospects and demand for skills, and most likely to suffer long-term dislocation from the lockdown. So arts, entertainment and leisure sector, it's quite a modestly sized sector in Leeds City region and West Yorkshire. That's a real outlier in terms of the proportion who's still on furlough. And the position of that sector is corroborated by other data. So if we look at national vacancy data, vacancies fell by 86% in that sector between March and April and haven't really seen any recovery since then, unlike most other sectors, including sectors like retail, business admin and hospitality. So if we look at those furlough sectors, if you like, that segment, we've got a real mix of workers who could potentially be displaced. So in arts and entertainment, we've got quite a high skilled employment profile with lots of people qualified at a higher level, people working in professional and associate professional occupations, culture, media and sport occupations, for example. But then within hospitality, we've got a lower skill profile and lots of people working in elementary occupations around hospitality. So bar staff, people assisting in the kitchen, things like that. So if those people are displaced in large numbers, we'll have quite a mixture of people who will require assistance. But I think the impact of the crisis won't be limited to those sectors currently have high levels of staff on furlough. There's potential long-lasting impact in other segments that we've discussed. So, for example, the obvious example will be the shift from physical retail to online channels, which has been accompanied by reduced footfall in town and city centres, and which has also had a wider impact on the service economy. Looking at manufacturing, we're seeing changes in consumer behaviour and demand, and also an impact on international supply chains as a result of the crisis. And data from the insolvency service for Leeds City region suggests, or it indicates, that we've had significant redundancies in manufacturing in recent months. So that's a sector that is being impacted. And obviously, on the more positive side, we're seeing an increase in demand for digital services and skills because of the shift to e-commerce, remote working, remote learning, for example. So we can see the beginnings of some of those changes in the structure of the economy, but we don't know what the long-lasting impact will be with any certainty. Next slide, please. So we've touched on national data for vacancies, what's happening locally in terms of recruitment. So obviously that's a key indicator of the health of the labour market. We don't have official statistics at this local level, so we have to rely on the data from the internet relating to the job adverts that are posted online. And we use a tool called Labour Insight, which gives an account of new vacancies that are posted during a given time period. And so this chart looks at the monthly trend for 2020 and compares it with the trend for 2019. And we can see the steep fall in April of 50% in the number of online job postings. But since then, there's been a fairly steady recovery. So the figure for August 2020 is 90% of the March 2020 figure, i.e. the pre-lockdown phase, and 86% of the August 2019 level, so for the equivalent month in the previous year. So we are starting to see, or we're seeing what looks like a sustained recovery. I think what we should emphasise is it's a volatile situation and there is no guarantee that it will be sustained. So, for example, a second lockdown could certainly knock things off course in terms of employees' recruitment behaviour. Next slide, please. So how does that work out across occupations? What's the picture for recruitment by occupation? Where we're seeing the strongest recovery and which occupations are struggling? So this analysis looks at broad occupational categories using Labour Insight. I should say, don't read too much into the relative weight of the occupational categories because some jobs are less likely to be advertised online, and I would expect that to be the case for retail sales and hospitality, for example. As noted before, some of the occupations have remained resilient through the crisis. So health occupations will be an obvious example where we didn't see a huge decline in sort of recruitment activity. But pretty much all of the other occupational categories saw a steep fall between March and April. But on the positive side, all of them have seen at least some measure of recovery, particularly in the month of August. And some of those occupational areas like IT now appear to be back on levels last seen in March, although others have quite a lot of ground to regain. For example, clerical occupations, engineering. So it's quite a diverse picture at the moment. Next slide, please. So the Labour Insight tool looks at the inflow of vacancies into the labour market, so the number of new job postings that are notified via the internet. But we also have figures from a company called Adzuna, who work with DWP, and this shows the stock of live vacancies that are on the internet at a given time. So when we compare these with the number of people who are claiming unemployed, we can see how many jobless people are competing for each vacancy. And it shows the degree of challenge people face in the labour market. The first thing to know from the chart is that there's been a big increase in the ratio. So in March, there were around 2 claimants per vacancy in Leeds City region. By August, though, this figure stood at more than 6, which is slightly above the national average. I should say that the position has actually improved in recent months because of the recovery in vacancies, but it's still a challenging one. The second key point to note is how much the position varies by district. So Barnsley and the West Yorkshire districts perform the worst. So we've got a ratio of 16 claimants per vacancy in Barnsley and around 14 in Bradford. So as far as West Yorkshire is concerned, though, the exceptions are Leeds and Wakefield, where the ratio is somewhat lower. Looking at Leeds, obviously, as a key economic centre, it has large numbers of vacancies which are taken up by people from across the city region, as reflected in sort of known commuting patterns. So a general caveat in interpreting this analysis is that people do travel to work, so they're not confined to opportunities in their home district. But nonetheless, it gives you some insight into the balance between labour supply and demand at district level. Next chart, please. Next slide, please. So the biggest challenge that's presented by the crisis, I think it's fair to say, is the considerable increase in unemployment. And we have fairly timely data on claimant unemployment that relates to people who are claiming benefits primarily because they're out of work. As I mentioned before, changes to benefit eligibility mean that a small number of those counted in this analysis are in a job, but on a very low income. We reported on the situation regarding unemployment at June's ESP meeting, in wake of the huge increases that we saw in claimants in April and May. There was a slight decline in June, but the claimant count grew again in July by 3,000, or 3% in West Yorkshire, and 4,000, also 3% across the wider city region. And in more usual circumstances, this will be seen as a big increase. So we've now got 108,000 people who are claimant unemployed in West Yorkshire and 131,000 across the city region. So looking at West Yorkshire, for which we have a long time series of data, claimant unemployment is now at its highest level since September 1987. So we're getting towards those sort of mass unemployment figures that we saw in the 80s. Next slide, please. So this chart shows the pattern of growth in the claimant count by district in absolute and proportionate terms. And overall, claimants increased by 90% in West Yorkshire and 96% in Leeds City region. And the reason that Leeds City region is higher in terms of its growth is because the districts in North Yorkshire plus York have seen bigger percentage increases in the claimant count. So Craven's seen an increase of 200%, for example, and it's more than 150% in Harrogate and York. And that's because that scale of growth in percentages, that scale of percentage growth reflects the low starting positions for those districts in terms of unemployment. So they started from a low base. West Yorkshire, in contrast, those districts typically had already had a high level of unemployment. So the percentage increases aren't as marked. But the absolute growth is biggest in the West Yorkshire districts, as you can see from the chart. So Leeds up by 18,000 between March and July, Bradford up by 14,000 and Kirklees 8,000. Bradford also has the highest rate of claimant unemployment relative to its population across the city region at 9.3%, compared with a national average of 6.5%. And that's one of the highest rates in the country. But all the West Yorkshire districts above the national average, with the exception of Wakefield. Next slide, please. So the age profile of unemployed claimants is important because younger and older people face particular challenges in the labour market. So even though young people are less likely to be eligible for the relevant benefits, the number of young claimants has more than doubled for 16 to 24-year-olds, so up by 108% between March and July. We now have 28,000 young people who are jobless across the city region, 24,000 in West Yorkshire. And as we noted previously, labour market entrants are taking longer to connect to jobs at the moment. And that's reflected in claimant rates. So claimants as a proportion of the economically active population in the relevant age groups. For 16 to 24-year-olds, it's 13% in both Leeds City Region and West Yorkshire. Sorry, it's 15% for West Yorkshire and 13% for Leeds City Region. And that compares with overall rates of 9% and 10% respectively. So it's much higher. The claimant rate is much higher for young people. The number of claimants aged 50 to 64 has also grown, albeit less quickly. So by about 86% between March and July. And the claimant rate is also lower than for young people and those aged 25 to 49. But I think the key point to note here is that people in this over 50 age group find it difficult to get back into work and often become economically inactive in these kind of poor labour market conditions. And more widely, there's a concern that employment rates for over 50s, which have been growing very rapidly prior to the crisis, both nationally and locally, will go into reverse. Next slide, please. So just to look at in more detail, or to broaden the sort of scope of what we're looking at in terms of benefit claimants, take up of universal credit is an important indicator of the impact of the crisis. Universal credit is a single payment for each household to help with living costs for those on a low income, as well as out of work. So within this group who are claiming universal credit, we're including, as well as unemployment claimants, people who are self-employed and whose income's been affected by the restrictions, people with COVID-19 or in a household that's isolating, who are eligible for statutory sick pay, and people who've been furloughed and are on a low income. So between March and July, the number of claimants in the city region increased by 75%, or 116,000, and by 92,000 in West Yorkshire, also 75%. That's actually lower than the national increase of about 86%. So that means we now have 273,000 people on universal credit in Leeds City Region. So it's a huge increase and a huge number of people affected, as reflected in sort of benefit claimants. Next slide, please. Now, we noted previously that new entrants to the labour market have contributed to the increase in claimant unemployment. Young people are obviously facing a very challenging labour market, and there's a risk of them becoming disconnected from the labour market with implications for their longer term prospects. So it's interesting to look at the scale of this and the dynamics of this, in particular how many young people are joining the labour market. So the chart that I've cited there looks at people who've the number of young people, well, the destinations of young people following study at 16 to 18. But first of all, we can look at Key Stage 4 and what leavers do immediately after completing their GCSEs. And about 85% of the cohort remain in education based on last year's figures. But nearly 1,500 went into an apprenticeship and nearly 1,000 went into a job. So that's in addition to 2,000 young people with no sustained destination or whose destination is not known. So even at age 16, large numbers of young people typically look to get into the labour market through an apprenticeship or through a job. And when we look at 16 to 18 leavers, which is the subject of the chart, about 47% of the cohort remain in education, many of those going into higher education. But we've got 2,400 going into apprenticeships, 4,600 into employment, and again, large numbers in no sustained destination. Looking at higher education, we've got around 40,000 qualifiers or graduates each year from Leeds City Region institutions, and around 40% of those enter employment in the city region. If you look at graduates who are actually from the city region and are studying across the country, that comes to around 24,000 people, and around 60% of those enter employment in the city region. So we've got considerable number of labour market entrants across all those different dimensions. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to turn to now is another aspect of the crisis in terms of, which is of concern, in terms of participation in employment and skills programmes and the availability of opportunities via technical education routes. We know that many college courses have adapted to the crisis by moving to online delivery, but for apprenticeships, which require workplace training, the situation is particularly problematic. We know from national figures that the number of apprenticeship starts nationally since the beginning of the lockdown continues to run at around half of its usual level. So it's 47% lower compared with the same period of 2019. And obviously the fall reflects the fact that COVID-19 has resulted in the closure of colleges. Some employers are unable to start or continue apprenticeships. And the Department for Education also highlights that some of the figures might be subject to underreporting by providers and employers. In terms of the bits of the apprenticeship programme that are worst affected, it's 16 to 18-year-olds who are hardest hit. So the number of starts is 2/3 lower compared with the previous year for this age group, whereas starts for people aged over 25 are about 40% lower. Intermediate apprenticeships have also seen the steepest decline, down by 63%. And in contrast, higher apprenticeships are only down by about 5%. In subject terms, the worst affected sectors in terms of the reduction in starts are retail and commercial enterprise, leisure, travel and tourism, and also construction. And at least the first two of those are the ones that you would expect to see being affected, as they reflect the ones impacted by the COVID restrictions. Next slide, please. So I think we'll actually skip this one, but it was provided as just to show what's happening locally in terms of apprenticeships. We only have data up until for the first 3 quarters of the academic year, 2019 to 2020. And what that shows is a 19% reduction in apprenticeship starts in Leeds City region compared with the previous year. And for the same period, national apprenticeship starts fell by about 13%. So what we can infer from that quite limited information is that apprenticeship starts locally might be harder hit than nationally, but we don't have the up-to-date data that we have nationally that shows a full lockdown period. So it's quite a limited picture. Next slide, please. So in terms of conclusions, there has been a return to work from furlough. The majority are working remotely or back to their usual place of work now, but we're still looking at large numbers who could be impacted by the wind down of the job retention scheme. So we've got a high vulnerability to redundancies. The displaced workers are likely to be from sectors like arts, entertainment, hospitality and admin and support services, which have high furlough rates. We don't know how long lasting the impact on these sectors will be and how quickly they'll recover. Sectors with staff who are sectors who have most of their staff back at work aren't necessarily insulated, and we talked about redundancies in manufacturing and also structural changes in sectors like retail. But on a more positive note, there are growing signs of recovery in recruitment activity, both nationally and locally, and hopefully this will be sustained. On a more negative note, we're seeing a return towards levels of unemployment that are reminiscent of the 1980s, and there's a concern about long-term damage to young people and older workers as a result of this unemployment situation. We can also see around apprenticeships that there's an immediate issue around availability of opportunities for technical education and training, which will need to be addressed as part of recovery planning. Okay, that's it in terms of my input. Thank you.
Yeah, so there's lots of issues here. Any quick comments or questions for Peter here? Nav, you wanted to say something?
Not really. I'll put it on the chat. Essentially, I don't think it's a lack of training opportunities. It's a lack of jobs that's stopping the apprenticeship. So employers aren't taking on apprentices, and just in case everyone's not clear, an apprentice has to get paid a wage, and all those spots are down. And I think the drop will really come over the next 2 months, which is usually the biggest recruitment period.
Can I just pass a comment, please?
Sure.
I just thought that was probably one of the most interesting presentations I've ever had the privilege of seeing while sitting in a WYCA meeting. Genuinely, I thought that was most useful, and I'd really appreciate if those slides were shared afterwards.
Certainly. I think you should have received them by email anyway, but
you should have got them already.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Councillor Byford. Okay, if we can move on to the next topic, well, there's a paper that was included in deck which talks about economic recovery and the future employment skills policy, which is the response to a lot of the data that Peter was presenting. Mark, can I welcome you to the panel? Do you want to make some comments on the work here? Mark Temple. Mark, you're still on mute. Yeah, I've come off now, I think. Nope.
Hi, Rashik. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, yeah, I'm primarily here because I'm picking up on the launch of the local digital skills partnership, which, as many will understand, will play a key part in helping with economic recovery over the coming months and probably years, and absolutely should be a sustainable program rather than something that is just about the economic recovery program. So very briefly, for those who are not aware, we are the 7th local digital skills partnership in the country in alignment with DCMS. So exciting to be leading that piece of work. Put simply, the aim is to support the growth of digital skills across West Yorkshire's region, to support SMEs and the local economy, enhance the communities and social inclusivity via the growth of digital skills. So for those who weren't aware, there's 11.9 million people in the UK who do not have basic digital skills. And when we talk about basic digital skills, that is as simple as being able to send an email. So that's still quite a scary number. So it shows the size of the task nationally. The other element to that is, and it's been touched on many times already in this afternoon's session, is to support the growth of the workforce of the future. And that's working with education providers to ensure we basically, in essence, got the skills to support the jobs of the future. And again, I think there's a huge skill gap there in terms of people leaving education and what employers need. So how do we look to bridge that gap and make sure that we support the economy moving forward? And obviously, at this point in time, it is very much heavily aligned to the economic recovery programme and how we can work to support that with the enhancement of digital skills. My purpose is to leverage West Yorkshire and businesses and partnerships within West Yorkshire and bring in partnerships from around the UK to deliver targeted interventions to influence those specific areas and support those most in need. And again, we talked already about the growing number of people in disadvantaged areas and needs, etc., where we really do need to put some serious focus on. Initial steps, we will be hosting a launch event very shortly, likely to be mid-October, to promote the aims and aspirations and encourage further collaborations from around the region and the broader UK. We will be then forming a digital skills partnership board. So again, bringing in people to support those specific activities and provide the oversight required. As I say, the overall focus and activity has to be driven by the data for good. So Peter's presentation there, whilst not giving a great picture, is a superb starting point in terms of using that data for good. So it's about building the correct projects to grow the skill sets around the region and make sure that one, they work for COVID response, but also two, that they're sustainable moving forward. And I think the biggest piece is that it supports all. It has to be fully inclusive. And as I'm only 6 days in, Rashik, I'll stop at that point. And if anybody's got any questions on the local DSP, I'm happy to take questions. And if not, people can pick up with me offline.
Any questions for Mark on the Digital Skills Partnership? And thanks, Mark. I mean, this is a really important part of the program here. We need to help people across all ages back into employment, and the Digital Skills Partnership is a big part of the help there. So appreciate that.
Absolutely. If
anybody wants to get involved in that, then go back to Mark directly or come back through the panel. Yeah, we really need everybody's support in help drive this forward.
Absolutely.
Another part of the answer is also getting control of the adult education budget. And the next topic is for Catherine to give us an update on where we're at with that.
Yep, thanks, Rashik. So, colleagues, you have received numbers of papers from us, and we've had lots of discussions in the past at this panel meeting around preparing for AEB and looking at developing the strategy. Last time we reported that we were in consultation, and we had a private consultation session with you as well. You will have received the feedback from the consultation and the draft strategy from Lindsay in August. So the strategy was prepared, taking into account the consultation responses. And as your paper says at 2.5, the strategy went to the Combined Authority Board and was approved on the 4th of September, I'm very pleased to say. So that gives us the green light to go ahead and prepare. So the next steps for AEB are this Thursday, we have a briefing session for providers about the procurement opportunity. We've got around 150 delegates registered for that. So a lot of people keen to hear how we're going to handle AEB across West Yorkshire. The procurement will be a two-stage process. So using the dynamic purchasing system, from the first week in October, providers will register an interest in delivering AEB. Their application will be assessed against some brief criteria that will then allow them to go onto the full register. And then in January, we will be opening up our procurement calls for those people who have got onto the full register. In the meantime, we'll be having dialogue with the grant providers, and we'll be looking at announcing the value of the grant provision in March, because that's when we get the allocation from the ESFA. And during that time, we'll then consult with the delivery partners, with the grant providers to start with, on the content of their delivery plans and around expected volumes, price profiles, what they're proposing to deliver with the grant, what the timeline for that, and any activity that they will be undertaking through subcontracting. As I said, we get the final allocations in March, so that's when we can actually confirm everything. So the procured activity will be confirmed in April, and hopefully, fingers crossed, everything will start being delivered from August next year. As you're all aware, I think, Lindsay has now gone on maternity leave, and we welcome Craig Moffat to the team, who's the interim AEB manager. He started on the 24th of August, so we're quickly playing catch up. And I would introduce Craig, but I think he's just had to go offline, so apologies for that, Rashik. And that's the update on AEB, unless anybody's got any questions.
No, I think we're moving as fast as we can. And again, it's an important part of the programme. We need to get control of that budget and make sure that it's aligned to the growth that we need in the region. So thank you to you and the team doing that. Any questions for Catherine? Seems the team's very quiet today. There's very few questions. Okay, let's move on to the next topic, and again, a very critical topic to us, which is climate. I hope you've read the report, and Jackie, do you want to take us through where we're at on the green skills and the carbon reduction pathways work?
Excellent. Thank you, Chair, and hi, everybody. So this paper is really, I suppose, a start of a conversation. And really the aim of today is to kind of get some of those initial ideas from yourself about how the panel might want to get more involved in helping us to tackle the climate emergency. There is a lot of information in the paper. I'll give you a very quick overview, but there is a lot of information we could provide separately if the panel do want. But as some background in terms of our ambitions around tackling climate change, we've had quite a long history, but most recently, last June, we declared a climate emergency, like our national government and a lot of local authorities. And that resulted in us having to strengthen our regional ambition. So again, I won't talk too much about science at all, but there is science behind all of this. But we adopted a new strengthened target in light of this climate emergency to being, as a region, net zero carbon by 2038, but with some significant progress by 2030. So lots of ambition, and to date we have coordinating a range of work. We have an energy strategy delivery plan that has about 40 or so different actions on there. And you can see in the paper there, I think it's paragraph 2.5, there are some of the good work that is going on across the city region. There's too much to put in a paper, but again, if people want, do contact me separately. I can talk you through a lot more of the actions going on. So we are making good progress. The city region has seen a 32% reduction in its carbon emissions since 2005. However, I can't stress enough how meeting net zero carbon by 2038, how much of a challenge that is. And it's such a challenge that in June of this year, the Leeds City Region Local Enterprise Partnership as a board themselves endorsed all panels within the LEP to actually come up with a series of actions and for them to take a proactive role and come up with an action plan within the next 6 months. So that's really what I'm doing here today, is starting that process. I should say, and again, I'll talk quickly through some of the actions in the paper, but these are just suggestions. It's totally up for the board and the panel to identify how you do want to go forward. These are just some of our initial suggestions. So you'll see in paragraphs 2.7 to 2.12, we have been doing a really important piece of work called the emission reduction pathway. Again, I won't talk about the science. We haven't got enough time to go through it all, but rest assured that this is a really important piece of work that allows us for the first time to really be able to see how we can meet that net zero target by 2038. So what we are doing is we are mapping and we are looking at a number of different pathways to how we decarbonise our transport sector, the power sector, our buildings, land use and agriculture, and also industry. And there are a number of ways that we can do that. And again, there is a much more detailed presentation if panel members want me to come back, and I can talk them through some of that. But what that piece of work does is it shows us that we can do this. It's going to be really challenging and really ambitious, but we can do this. What I think for today is probably more important for the panel is for yourselves to know that actually there are some short-term things that we can start to do right now that actually will really help us on that road to net zero, and they appear in all the different pathways that we've looked at. So again, I won't go through all of them, but you can see around paragraphs 2.10 there, it is some significant actions that we need around reducing car travel. So we need to reduce car travel by about 21%. How on earth do we do that? Well, we need to increase walking by more than 80% increase in walking. We need to see a staggering 2,000% increase in cycling. Now, those numbers might sound huge, but again, this is the scale of the ambition, but not unachievable. We are seeing some really good results already in things like cycling. But we also need to see increases in bus patronage, train, and again, obviously in COVID-19, some of those things will be trickier. So there's some significant things, but in terms of transport, there are the key things that we need to start to be doing in the next few years, working out how we can start to deliver that level of ambition. In terms of buildings, another really good example, we need to create energy efficient homes, and we need to have low carbon heating as an absolute. We need to probably retrofit as a no-brainer around 700,000 homes in the city region. To put that in perspective, we've got about 1 million homes. So again, these are huge areas, but again, we have the technology, we know what we need to do. We need to look at how we heat, innovative things becoming much more common. Again, people in Leeds will be familiar with district heating, so a number of things that we can start to do there. But we can also need to install lots more solar panels. We've only got around 30,000 homes with solar panels across our region. We need to take that number up to about 171,000. I'm going to stop there. There is a lot more information in the packs. In 2.11, there is a link in your report where you can get the full details. But hopefully what you can start to see is a direction of travel. And I think that's really important going forward, because I suppose for the first time, you can start to see where maybe there might be quite a lot of economic opportunities. So I mentioned, yes, it will be challenging, but with these big challenges, potentially there's some big rewards. In a recent report by the Local Government Association, they have actually said that tackling the climate emergency in West Yorkshire could create 70,000 jobs by 2050. So the point is, yes, it's going to be a challenge, but there are some big opportunities that we can have around skills and employment if we take action quickly. What we've tried to do, and again, there are a number of reports, but Annex 1 of your pack starts to articulate where some of those opportunities are around kind of employment and skills opportunities. They are no mean an exhaustive list. There are probably lots more, but again, it's to give you a flavour of today. I've mentioned retrofit in particular. We have a lot of money coming to us as a region and nationally over the next couple of years around retrofit. We know we can create jobs through that process. Also the low carbon heating side of things, a massive opportunity area that we know, again, in the city region, we have quite a lot of expertise in. So some really immediate opportunities as well as like longer term opportunities. But there are also other things, low emission vehicles, the infrastructure associated to that, a whole suite of opportunities around innovative technologies, particularly around the universities and hydrogen. There's a huge amount of work going on around there that we can maximise for. The whole range of support services. Again, some of you will be absolute experts in this, but to develop low carbon projects, you need both technical support but also financial support. So it's a huge growth area there. And land management, I mentioned that it's a net zero target, so we do need to plant as many trees as we can, and we need to change the way that we use our land and agricultural practices. So again, huge potential there around skills and upskilling of people in the future. So that's some of the high level opportunities around skills. In addition to that, and obviously COVID is on everyone's mind at the moment, we know that we can actually help the economy and our people to recover through investing in tackling the climate emergency as part of our COVID-19 recovery. You will see in, I think it's Appendix 2, as part of our West Yorkshire Economic Recovery Plan, we've tried to articulate that actually, we can create these jobs and these skills through our ambitions around net zero. So we have asked for, as part of that, and Sonia's on the call as well, we've worked together to ask for about a £10 million ask for central government to create for the first time a net zero skills partnership. We don't currently have one. There's lots of ad hoc and little small pockets of very specific activity going on. But what we'd like to do is try and create a kind of a partnership that pulls together all the players. And then supported through that would then be a workforce fund to actually support the providers to start to deliver some of this, and particularly things like energy efficiency, as I mentioned, they'll be coming through very quickly. So there's some opportunities there straight away. Final things that I just wanted to add there. So you'll see in your paper, paragraphs 2.13 214 and up to 219. These are, again, just some additional areas for yourselves to consider. Obviously, you've got the future employment and skills plan coming up. So again, I think there may be some opportunities there as part of the refresh to look at the role of that in helping to tackle the climate emergency. And also in those paragraphs, I've started to talk a little bit about the just transition. I think we could probably spend a whole meeting talking about the just transition, but there are a number of, I suppose, winners from us transitioning to being net zero, but there also could be some losers, particularly in the traditional fossil fuel industries and some areas where people start to lose their jobs. So we know that we need to make sure that we don't leave anybody behind, and that we need to be making sure that people who might have worked in the traditional polluting and carbon intensive industries, we need to make sure they have opportunities to retrain and to actually use those really good skills that they have. Some of them are very, are experts. The skills are transferable. We need to make sure that those people, we can retrain, redeploy them in the net zero industries that we create for the future. So that's a whistle-stop tour. There is a lot of information in there. There are a series of recommendations in the report, Chair, but it would be really good today to get some initial comments from the panel, particularly on what actions they think maybe we need to undertake as we refresh the employment and skills plan to make sure that it adequately can help support tackling the climate emergency. And then the second question, and I think this is also outlined in recommendation 8.4, the panel to really give a bit of steer in terms of how they feel about some of the areas that we've talked about today, or equally some of the other areas around kind of net zero carbon and tackling the climate emergency that they are particularly interested in, because Sonia's team and myself, we'd like to come back, over the next couple of months and start to explore those a little bit more with you.
So Jackie, a couple of questions, if I may, before we open it up more widely. So the first question is, have we factored in there how the changing nature of work as a result of COVID-19 will help accelerate some of this? Right.
It's fair to say we've probably underestimated it. So when we were doing the piece of work, we were thinking 10-15%, but in reality now we might have at the peak got up to 80%. So yes, we do need to look at some of those things, particularly working from home patterns. Again.
Yeah, and I know there's encouragement to work back in the offices, get people back in the offices. And I think once people have proven that they can work from home and it is productive, whilst it's not going to be 100% working from home, I think it will cause a significant increase in home working, which in turn reduces travel for lots of good reasons, right? Okay, and so from a skills agenda perspective, there are many touch points, right? There's skills in terms of helping us get to that carbon neutral platform. I think we're talking about, was it 3.6 million tons of CO2 we need to reduce over that period? I think that was a number I remember off the top of my head.
11 megatons, so yeah, 11 million tons of carbon in total.
That's what we have today, but the reduction is what, about 3.6 we've got to get down?
Well,
right?
It's more or less net zero, so it's more or less the full 11 million, sorry.
Okay, so that's a massive number if we're going to try and get to that. Okay, and so transportation is the largest chunk, and then buildings, and then we're into the other pieces they talked about. Okay.
Yes, and land-based transport is the biggest constituent part there. Yeah.
Okay, and how does air travel affect us? Air and train, so mass transport. Is it primarily personal vehicles that's the issue, or is this?
Currently, right now, it's the cars on the road that we need to address. Aviation and some of those other transports are not even. They're 0.5 of a percent towards it at the moment. They will, however, grow, but at the moment, it's road transport that's the biggest problem. And actually, when you think of the work that we all do in terms of local authorities, the LEP, actually road transport is actually what really within our gift to actually really influence. And we've got some really great projects coming up, things like transforming cities, where there's huge opportunity to actually get more people out their cars, which is what we're ultimately trying to achieve.
Okay, so team, we're looking for ideas for what should the panel be doing. How do we play our part in creating that net zero economy we need, the green economy we need going forward? So suggestions.
Can I come in, Ashik?
Sure, please do.
Hiya. Thanks for the presentation, much appreciated. I'm chair of the West Yorkshire Consortium of Colleges, and my own institution isn't, but several other colleges are thinking of investing quite heavily in green technologies. But to be honest, I think where people have struggled is they're not really sure what green technologies are. Like, are they all to do with automobiles, or is it all to do with construction and refitting? So I think there's room there, if you have the time, to meet up with some of the college leads on this issue and perhaps come up with what could colleges be doing now. And I'm not speaking from my own institution, I'm speaking on behalf of others. And by the way, while I'm on, the report you were talking about, section 2 point whatever, I haven't got that in my papers. I've got a brief summary, I think. I've certainly got no document with an appendix. So if there is a bigger document, if that can be circulated after, I'd appreciate it.
So there's an email on the 4th, Nav, and I'm just looking at the email now. I'm pretty sure you were on the distribution list for it.
Okay, so I've just been sloppy. I apologise. Right, I'll go find it.
Yeah, no, there is a paper, and it's the one that also has the guide to how to join Zoom.
Okay, thank you.
Jeanette sent that out.
Okay, thanks.
And if it's not there, then we're more than happy to send it to you again. If anybody else hasn't got it, we'll send it. Yeah.
And it would be great to follow up. We've had some initial chats with various colleges and university, and also the N8 as well. So that's what I mean about there's quite a lot of people starting to get into this space, which is the idea, and Sonia's on the call as well, so the idea around that skills partnership. If we can get the money for that, we can actually bring all the right players together. That strikes me as kind of one of the very first steps, is let's bring everybody together so we can start to actually look at where our strengths are, where those gaps potentially are. Our emissions reductions pathway work is starting to show where the direction of travel, but there's still more work to be done on that over the next couple of months. But the partnership could almost start to really pull together where we go next.
Yeah. So I think it was Peter, then Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, Jackie, this is the most important agenda, even with COVID, but it absolutely is. It's absolutely critical. And you'll be aware that the universities have, as you say, mentioned N8 there, and obviously the expertise that exists in Leeds City region, West Yorkshire. And we were pleased to kind of bring together a lot of academics who were kind of talking about this to inform the economic recovery plan. And so, they're very keen to continue that conversation, and I'm sure you've got their details. I just had a sort of a question really, and it's about the financing of green investment. And, one of the kind of responses sometimes, understandably, is how much will this cost? Can we invest in it? And, what's the rate on that investment? What more can we do to sort of encourage that? And do you get a sense of a shift, of pension, insurance funds and others sort of saying, look, actually, there is going to be a return on it. We should be doing it anyway from an ethical point of view, but actually, there's also going to be a return for people who contribute individually to pension insurance funds. Where are we kind of in our sort of thinking in a region around that?
So that's a huge question, Peter. The instant answer is that we are told increasingly that money isn't the problem. What's the problem is that we need to have a robust pipeline of projects that are ready-ish to go, and that's where I suppose a number of combined authorities are at the moment. So we work very much with BEIS really closely through something called the Energy Hub. So they've started to fund and to give us some additional project development support and some capacity to work with our local authority partners, but not just our local authority partners, also the wider public sector. And also, key kind of big partners to try and start to come up with those investment ready propositions. So for me in West Yorkshire, that's what we need to do pretty quickly. So again, you'll see in the economic recovery proposition, we've asked for a little bit more money to actually create that pipeline. So we have that robust pipeline. We can then, what we can do is start to look at a number of different funding mechanisms. There are simple funding mechanisms that, you know, local authorities have access to, the value in terms of prudential borrowing, but there are increasingly a range of innovative things we can do, anything from community share all the way up to green bonds, but we can also look at kind of private investment. But in order to get that private investment, we have increasingly being advised that we need some kind of investment portfolio. So again, this comes back to that pipeline, and the aim is to create some kind of financial proposition that you can go out to market, very similar to some of the things we've been doing on mass marketing. Some of you might have also heard, particularly Bristol down in the southwest and the West Southwest Combined Authority. They are looking at a kind of a low carbon investment proposition to go out to market. So the funding isn't necessarily the problem for us right now. We've got to get our houses in order. We've got to get some big investment ready propositions, and then we can go out and get that all important money to come in.
Rashid, you're silent.
Yes. Always helps to come off mute. So thanks, Jackie and Peter. I think that's an important question. For me, investment ready propositions have a very simple formula. It's if we can reduce our CO2 emission by this amount by doing this amount of work, this project, and it will require this amount of funding. And that equation is a really simple equation that we need to just make very clear. Bear in mind, if we can do it for ourselves, we can do it for other regions as well. So this can be a growth opportunity for us. It brings jobs and an opportunity back in the region. So let's pick the things that we can do well, prove it to ourselves in our region, and then get that done as much as we can around the world, because that creates new opportunities for us here. Councillor Inchcus, you want to come in?
Yeah, it was another finance question, really, following on from the previous conversation. Really around the skills finance, though, obviously, we've got 1.4 billion asking our economic recovery plan to government. They have to invest in recovery, because otherwise nobody in the nation will be able to recover from this. But my experience of government is they don't always give you the amount of money you need. And therefore, if they don't give us £10 million for the skills green jobs that we need, is there other avenues? I mean, our government thinking generally about green jobs and skills, because actually it is a huge area of work. If they're not taking it seriously nationally, can we expect them to take it seriously regionally? So obviously for us it is, and we absolutely need it. But are there any other outlets, is what I'm asking, where we could pitch for that money?
I'm hoping Sonia might want to come in at this point as the expert more. I mean, we are making the case at the MP11 level, and also with our energy hubs, which is directly linked into BAYS. But I maybe might try and pass over to Sonia and see if she has a perspective from the wider skills, if that's all right.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Absolutely, we are exploring other avenues, and the digital boot camps call that Brian mentioned at the very beginning of this meeting also offers an opportunity to work collaboratively with colleges on areas that require technical skills. So we are going to look into that, but it's the timescales that will come into play there, because that application is to be completed by November. So it's having something that's proposition ready quite quickly.
Okay. Some more questions. I mean, I'd like actually for us to, as a team, to come back and say, these are the 2 or 3 things that will make a difference, because that's going to make, it's going to help us play our part in this agenda. So if you don't have any suggestions here, I suggest, Catherine, we take this as an action going forward, that we get a small group together to actually build our response to this as a panel, and we come back to the next meeting with a considered view on that. Looking for volunteers to contribute to that particular piece of work.
And I think just picking up on Nav's comment, I think, Jackie, is about understanding, because we've sort of been here before a couple of years ago, and it is about understanding what's needed and looking at the timelines so that we can start planning in. And certainly the providers are very keen to be involved, but they can't, you know, they need to have time to plan in and train up for what is needed for the delivery, etc. So I think there's quite a lot of elements that we need to look at on this. So yes, we'll certainly take that forward, Rashik.
Okay, so really, if there's anybody who wants to volunteer to support that particular piece of work, maybe we have a short workshop or something just to try and flesh out very specifically what we should be doing in the region that can make a difference here. And I'm looking for tangible actions that we can see some progress, and building on the momentum that we've got from home working from COVID. How do we go forward here? Peter, thanks for volunteering to help. So Catherine, Peter O'Brien's offered to help here. Okay, I think that was the last topic. I can give a couple of minutes if anybody else wants to ask a question of Jackie or comment. Jackie, any last pleas? Any more requests from you before you run?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a big topic. Today was the start of the conversation, so that seems like a sensible approach to move it forward. We do have a piece of work live at the moment on energy efficiency and starting to map out the current supply chain and future skills need to. That could potentially, it's not available right yet, but that should be available early October, so we can feed that in as well, which might help.
Yeah, there's an excellent presentation on Project Rome a couple of weeks ago. It was really, really helpful as well. So if anybody wants to listen into that, that'd be really, really valuable. It provides a lot more of the science behind this as well.
Rashik, it's just Richard Mason here. I was just going to add, that was a really, really fascinating, and I appreciate the scale of what's being challenged here. But I think from an employability and skills perspective, there's a huge part to play in just embedding this across everything that's done. So the way that this is communicated. So, you know, when you're talking about the scale of the removal of car journeys, how we do that in a way that doesn't further alienate people who maybe don't have access to that. So it's embedding it within, you know, the changes around bus travel, train travel that we're doing as a region. And I think around employability and skills, it's around how all these projects and the language that's used, that we don't alienate. And I always see it when we say things like dirty coal, and I'm guilty for doing it all the time as well. It alienates people that live in ex-coal mining towns. And it's how you change the language around this to be a positive thing about investment, about enterprise, about these regions being able to positively contribute again in the way that they did with coal. And I think there's a big part to play across. I think of some of the stuff like the future goals and things that already do try to embed sustainability and environment, but it's trying to create that positive tone, because I think as a region, you know, when we're talking about the timescales we are, mass migration is probably going to become an issue at some point, and it's going to be one of the easiest tools to, you know, divisive tools in some of our towns. So I think it's how we embed this across the employability skills thing in everything that we do and try to create a positive, upbeat message around it.
Yeah, Richard, I think there's important points here. I mean, look, we can create the messaging to make it very positive, right? We can talk about digging for a fresh future. Right? There's lots of ways we can communicate this, and we can make it look very positive. And it's about really describing a vision of a more sustainable net zero carbon economy and how that economy will work, and then describing the journey on the path from where we are today to that future. Part of that journey is understanding the entrepreneurial skills that help create the changes in behavior, changes in business model, changes in structure, which make that possible. At the same time, showing how we can create those businesses in our region that can play their part in both making that possible for us and possible for others. And also taking the skills from the spectrum of capability we have in the region to go make that possible. So this is really about us coming together and really being the entrepreneurs to help build that future. So I know we've been talking about this a lot, and we've walked around this. I think it's time to stop talking and start acting, right? And I think it's actually stepping forward and saying we're going to make the difference here. That's going to make the difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Any last comments? Otherwise, I think we're coming to the end of this topic. Jackie, thank you. I think we'll come back. So I think Catherine's got the action to help us pull a small team together and really shape the very specific actions that we want to progress in the near term to contribute to this agenda. So I think that with the digital skills partnership are two big topics that come out of the meeting today that we've got to really pick up on and drive forward. And if Councillor Hinchcliffe is successful, and I know she will be in creating that future-ready skills economy and environment that we need for the region, I think we'll be on a good pathway to build the skills for us to be successful in the region. So with that, I'm going to close the open part of the meeting. Our next meeting is on the 25th of November at 2 p.m. So probably same time, same Zoom, probably maybe. We'll see you then.